Alright, so for a bit of context, since we had one more person join, this was a tutorial I was requested to give by a person interested in finding out how to prototype a simple attack in Unreal like a punch. I don't think that person is watching right now, but this is gonna be recorded so they can watch it later on. It's gonna be very technical oriented and I might go over time, so feel free to drop out if you're not interested or if time runs out and you have other things to do. So without further ado, let's dive in. What we are trying to build today is this. A prototype where you can walk up to an enemy and punch them and they're gonna take damage. Simple as that. Now first, let's start with the setup. You need to create a new project in Unreal. The latest release is 4.24. Personally, I recommend using 4.23 because 4.24 tends to crash for no apparent reason all the time. So yeah. So first we're gonna create an empty project. And these are some default stats you can assign to it. What we want to do is immediately create a new character class. And I'm gonna skip the step where you set up movement and possibly camera because I'm assuming that whoever is gonna be following this already is familiar with this stuff. So the first thing we want to happen for the punch mechanic to work is we want to have an hitbox. We're actually gonna go into the project settings first and we're gonna set up a binding for our input. We're gonna call it something like melee attack, and then we're gonna assign a keyboard key and a gamepad button. So back into the character we just made, we're gonna go in there, we're gonna create a new event graph, we're gonna call it something like combat, and we're gonna call the input that we binded a moment ago. So now that we are receiving our input, now we can actually spawn the hitbox. We're gonna right click on the graph here and we're gonna look for add a box collision. And what this thing is gonna do is gonna create the hitbox. We still have to set a relative transform, meaning where this box is gonna be relative to our character root position. And to find that out, we go back into the viewport and we add component and we add a box collision manually this time. So we can actually see it here overlapping our character, and then here on the right in the details panel we can manually tweak the location and then the extent of this hitbox so that we can see visually what values mean what. And once we have the right values for a hitbox, then we can write them down somewhere else and delete this one in here, because we're gonna go back into the combat graph and now we can make a transform and give it those same values. And once we connect this, we also can drag out from here, from the return value, and also set box extent. This way we can set both the relative location and the size of the box collision. And the reason we are doing all of this instead of just adding the box here like I was showing before is because if we add a box here, we're gonna have a collision there which is gonna be active all the time, which is a problem when it comes to collision detection. So we just want to create a new box collision for those frames where we want the attack to actually detect collision and apply damage. Speaking of applying damage, that's the next thing to do. Let's put some space in here because we're gonna need to drag out from the return value, promote it to a variable, then call it something like hitbox. And the reason we're doing this is because we are creating the hitbox, but we also want to save a reference to it, so we can use this reference to apply damage to whatever is overlapping with the hitbox. And we're gonna do that right now. We're gonna drag the hitbox from the left bottom panel here back into the graph. We're gonna get the hitbox, and then we can drag out from there and look for get overlapping actors. What this thing does, it takes your hitbox and it checks for every single other actor, so every single other character, etc., which is gonna be over inside that hitbox. You can see that you also have a class filter, and this is very good for optimization. Basically, it allows you, instead of checking everything which is inside, you can only restrict it to one type of actor. For example, here I'm showing two examples. The top is with a filter on character, and the bottom is with a filter on actor. The difference is that in the top case, you're only gonna be looking for other humanoid characters. So if you're making a boxing game, that's very useful, because then you're only gonna look for other boxers and not, for example, on some random piece of the stage. While the bottom is more for games where you actually want to also be able to damage objects like pieces of the environment. So you can either go for the top if it's more optimized, if you only need certain, only the characters to be affected, or the bottom if you need everything to be affected, sacrificing performance. So once you made a decision, then you can drag out from the overlapping actors and call the for each loop. And the idea there is that once you get all the actors overlapping with your hitbox, then you can go through each one of them, and then you want to apply damage to them. So you set up like this, and this is exactly what it's gonna do. It's gonna take the hitbox, look for all the actors currently on the hitbox, filter as we set, and then for each one of them is gonna do a series of things, in this case just applying damage. And make sure to set some kind of damage, at least for testing for now, so placeholder value, and also add a reference to the controller of your character base, or your character class that we made earlier, and also a reference to self for the damage causer, and set the damage type to the default value there, just to make sure that if we want to use those references later on, those are actually set up already. And one last thing, so far we created a hitbox, we went through everything which is overlapping it and applying damage to it, but now we also need to destroy the hitbox so it doesn't stay there forever. So let's take another let's get another reference to the hitbox, again from the left bottom panel here, drag it in here, and then call a destroy component on it, and hook it up there to complete it. So once it's done going through all the stuff in the overlapping actors and applying damage to all of them, then it's gonna destroy the hitbox and not before. So now that we have this basic stuff set up, we can add some comments, so hopefully this is gonna look cleaner, and that's gonna help us keep the code clean as we go on. So here again we spawn the hitbox and we set its location as well as its size. Here instead you take the hitbox. One difference you can see is that I changed this into a validated get. That means that instead of just getting it and going forward, it's actually gonna check if the hitbox is set to something, because down here we destroy the hitbox. So even though the way the code is structured, this is always gonna be set beforehand, we still want to make sure that it is actually set to something, otherwise you're gonna get a lot of errors. So if the hitbox is set, then it's gonna go through all the overlapping actors, and then it's gonna call this to all of them. And again, here we destroy the hitbox, so it doesn't stay there forever, but only for one frame when we press the attack input button. And since now it's all commented, we can also collapse this stuff to functions, again to keep the code tidy and neat. So first let's collapse all this stuff here in something like initialize attack hitbox. So this one creates the hitbox we're going to use for the attack. Down here, destroy the hitbox once it's done doing the attack. And this one is a bit more complicated because we have the bigger part, which is going through all of them and damaging all of them, but then we have the smaller part, which is damaging one specifically. So what we want to do is we want to collapse first this small part here into something like apply damage to actor, and then collapsing all of this as well with the function we just made inside this other function we're making now. So at the end, you're gonna have something like this, and this is the basic core of an attack. You give input, a hitbox is spawned, it cycles through each actor overlapping the hitbox and giving them damage, and finally destroys the hitbox. This is the most basic form of a punch. Now, next step is adding multiple damage frames. Because the way it's set up right now, you're gonna press the button and you're gonna deal damage in like one frame, which is like less than a second. But usually an animation has like multiple frames where it looks like it could damage somebody. So you want the damage to actually last multiple frames as well. The way we go about this, again, we get a reference to the hitbox we made earlier, and we look for bind event on component begin overlap. And from here we drag out from the event pin and we add a custom event. And we call it something like new hitbox overlap. So what this is gonna do is, after the hitbox has been created, if an actor which was not inside the hitbox before ends up walking into the hitbox, then this event is gonna be called. So now we know that one was not there before when we scroll through all of them, but now we know that this one just walked inside, so we know that we also have to damage this one. And if we go back into the damage overlapping actors, again, it goes through all of them, cycles through all the ones already inside, and then he applies damage to them. So we want that apply damage to also be here, so that when a new actor walks into the hitbox, that one is going to be damaged like the ones which were already inside were. But of course we need to bind the event, we need to connect this bind event node somewhere, otherwise it's never going to be executed. And if it's never executed, this registration never happens, so it never actually registers when some new actor overlaps. So we take this one and we actually put a lot of space up here, disconnect these two, and connect the bind event on component begin overlap instead to the damage overlapping actors and the main execution line. Also, this line over here between bind event and the new hitbox overlap, it's kind of ugly and it's gonna get in the way, so we disconnect that, and instead we drag out from event again. We look this time for create event, and then we're gonna have this nice node, and if you click on select function, we're gonna have a drop down menu which includes the new hitbox overlap custom event that we have down here. So we select that one, and now we have a connection between this node over here and this stuff down here, which means we can just move this and it's not gonna have some random spaghetti thingy going all around the place. Perfect. And also, because now they are no longer connected directly, we can take all of this, we can cut it, we can go inside damage overlapping actors, and we can paste it down here and connect it to completed. And the reason we do it like this is because now it's gonna take the hitbox, it's gonna cycle through all of the actors already overlapping, it's gonna damage them, and then it's gonna be like, okay, I already damaged all this stuff, but if anyone else walks into the hitbox, damage them as well. Perfect. But this can also create a problem. What happens if you spawn the hitbox, you damage an enemy, then that enemy walks out, and before the damage ends, then he also walks back in. Then he's gonna be damaged multiple times. And that's not something that we can allow. At least in certain, depending on the game design, this might not be what we want to happen. So what we do is, we go into the apply damage to actor function we made earlier. We put a lot of space in here. We create a new variable called damage actors. And we want this to be actor type variable, but also we don't want it to just to be a normal reference. We want to click on this circle icon here, and then we got different icons. We want to click on the one which has like a grid 3x3, which is the icon for an array type of variable. And what an array is usually the stuff over here, your variables, each one represents only one thing, while an array is like it's a list of those things. So if before it was only one actor or only one other thing that you see on screen, now it's gonna be a list of different people, characters that you're gonna see on screen. And the reason we want that is because we want to drag it in here and get it. Then we want to drag out from it and look for contains. Contains basically allows us to take an array and check if something like damage actor is listed inside the array or not. And we need to have that information to know if that actor has already been damaged or not. Now this is gonna look a bit of a mess if I keep going like this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag out from damage actors. I'm gonna make this a local variable called actor to be damaged, and I'm gonna rearrange stuff so it looks cleaner, and hopefully it's gonna be easier to follow once you can wrap your head around the local variable. But basically the point is we call the apply damage to actor function. We are passing over the actor which is supposed to be damaged. We are saving it so that it's gonna be easier to reference inside the function. Then we go with the contains function and we compare the actor which have already been damaged with this new one that we just declared. And if this new actor was not in there, then we're gonna proceed to damage it. While if the actor was already in there, then this is gonna be false and nothing's gonna happen. So we're not gonna damage the same actor twice. Simple as that. But we need to do a couple more things before this works. First, again, let's put a bit of space in there. Let's add the end node. And then let's do this. Let's do actor to be damaged, different and self. Because sometimes the hitbox is going to be too close to your own character, so you may accidentally try to damage yourself. So what we do here is we make sure that whatever actor you're currently trying to damage is never going to be yourself. And we use the end node so that in order for this to be true, you need to satisfy two conditions. The actor you're trying to be damaged should not have been damaged already, and the actor you're trying to damage should also not be yourself. If both of these are true, then this is gonna go forward. And on this side instead, what we want to do, add more space, take damaged actors, and we want to use the add node. Because again, we have a list of actors that we are supposed to already have hit for this attack, but we actually need to say somewhere that this one has been hit, which we're doing right here. If this actor to be damaged has not already been hit, then first you add it to the list of damaged actors which have been hit, and then you damage it. So that the first time this is gonna do this, and the second time this one is already gonna be there. So this one is not gonna happen twice for the same attack. But right now we're just adding stuff to the damaged actors list, which means that once you do an attack and you damage somebody, that one has already been damaged. So we need at some point to remove it from there, remove it from the list. And we're gonna do that in damage overlapping actors. Here, before we go through all the actors overlapping, we're gonna take our array again and we're gonna clear it. Which means that before cycling through all the overlapping actors, we're gonna make sure that this one is completely empty. So then we can go through them, we can damage them one at a time, and only the first time they're gonna be damaged. The first time that we try to damage one of them, they're gonna be damaged, and they're gonna be registered in damaged actor, so that they cannot be damaged more than once per attack. And with all of this, we have all the basics for a damage which can last multiple frames. Which brings us to animations. Now, there will be a way to achieve this without animations, but for the sake of this talk, lecture, workshop, whatever, I'm just gonna go straight into animations and try to keep it brief. So there is this nice website called mixamo.com. It's basically an royalty-free source of animations and character models by Adobe. What that means is that everything you download from here, you can use freely, but you can also put these characters and animations in games that you release, even commercially, and you're totally allowed to do that. You don't have to pay, and you're not gonna be sued, and you can even make money out of those games. So it's a great resource to get assets from. So we log in, we find a character that we like. I picked this one because it kind of looks like a very stylized old Kratos from God of War. And then we go into animations, and we can pair the character we picked with animations for it. In this case, I'm gonna go for an idle pose, but also a couple of attacks and something for when he gets hurt. And when you download them, you select character, you select animation, then you click download. You're gonna get two options here, either with skin or without skin. The difference is when you download with skin, you download both the character model and the animation, while if you go without skin, then you're just downloading the animation. So when you're downloading multiple things, you want the first thing you download to have a skin, and then after that you can just download without skin, because you only need the animation data, but you need at least one of them to also have a model data with it. Now in theory, the stuff you download from here you can just drag and drop into Unreal. It's that simple, but there's a catch. If you're gonna do more complex animation stuff, you're gonna need to use a feature in Unreal called root motion. Without going into detail, that really helps syncing the movement with the animation. By default, Mixamo assets don't work well with the root motion because they are supposed to be used with Unity only out of the box. But there's a very simple way to fix that. I'm not gonna go through it, but there's a very nice article online which is very easy to follow and tells you exactly how you can drop your stuff in Maya, and in like 30 seconds you can make any animation work perfectly in Unreal. I'm probably gonna link that somewhere at some point, but it's very easy to find, it's very easy to follow. So once we have that, then we need to drag and drop all of our assets into Unreal. First, you want to only drag and drop the one which is gonna have the model data, so the one with skin, because it's gonna give you these options as in import mesh and skeletal mesh, and this one are gonna basically allow you to have something to attach all the animations to. So first the one with the model, and then the animations only one. Also in the animation panel, make sure that it's gonna be animated time and not exported time, because the animation with from Mixamo generally have a lot of dead time after the animation is over. So if you don't want your character to just stand in a T-pose after the animation is done, make sure you're using animated time. So you import that one, you're gonna see all these assets, which are the texture, the material, and the basic idle animation. And then you can do the same for all the others. And in this case, make sure that the skeleton is set to whatever was imported when you imported the first asset, which is the one with the model as well. So make sure that one is the skeleton is the right one. Make sure animation length is animation time again, and then you can import all, and then you're gonna see all your animation there ready to be used. Now, first thing you do is you right click on your skeleton, you go create and animation blueprint. This is what an animation blueprint is gonna look like. As you can see down here, we have all your other animations ready to be used. Although you cannot, in the animation blueprint itself, you are only gonna set one of these, which is gonna be the idle pose. You select it, you drag it in here, and then you just connect it into the output pose here in the anim graph, the animation graph. And that means that your character is gonna be in an idle pose. As for punching and receiving damage, those are gonna need to be implemented slightly differently. So you go back into the content browser, you select the first of the animations that you want to implement, in this case the punching. You go create again, and this time create an animation montage. This is what a montage looks like. And I'm not gonna go in depth about what everything does. I'm just gonna show you what you need to know. So first, here you can go into the animation slot manager, and here you're gonna need to add 2 slots. The first one for the attacks, for the punches, and the second one I called hurt, and that's for stuff like receiving damage. And here then you can set which of these slots this montage is gonna use. In this case, since it's a punch, it's gonna use the attack slot. When you change the slot, you're gonna see that your character is gonna go into T-pose in the preview up here. That's just a bug in Unreal, don't worry. You just close the montage, you open it again, and then it's gonna be working fine again. So we do this 3 times in my case, because I had the 3 animations to implement through montage, the 2 punches and the one for getting damaged. And we're also gonna find them down here once we are in the montage view, so we can just quickly cycle through them. And then we want to scroll all the way down and go into notifies. Here we scroll using the scrubber down here until we find First, the frame at which we want to start having our attack frames. So the frame at which we want our hitbox to spawn and start dealing damage. Then we right click, we add a notify, new notify, and we call it something like attack start or start damage frames, whatever makes sense to you to understand and remember. We do that 3 times. The first we want to set when the attack frames are gonna start. The second one we want to set when the attack frames are gonna be over, but not the attack. And the last one when the wind down is over. Wind down is like after a punch, the time it takes for your model to go back into an idle position. So that yes, that here we start dealing damage, here we stop dealing damage, and this is like some cooldown time before your character can punch again. All very simple. And if we have a second attack, then we can quickly go into open the other montage as well. This is for punch 2. Add notify, and this time skeleton notifies, and you're gonna see that all the stuff that you added earlier through new notify, they're gonna be already there. So you don't need to give them a name again. They're already gonna be there, and you need to make sure that if they serve the same function, they should be the same. So just here and select the same ones. You can also just select them all at once and do a copy and a paste into the new montage. And in that case, make sure that you adjust them, because generally different animations have slightly different timing for when certain stuff happens. But and one last thing, when it comes to setting up animations, go into the actual animation themselves, so the one which are in green, and if they are animations that are supposed to be used in montages, then you want them to have root motion enabled. The reason is when they're using root motion, then the player is not going to be able to freely move the character or rotate the character, and that's usually best because, for example, when you're punching, you usually want your character to stand still, because usually if you can walk while punching, that always feels off, and then you're more likely to miss your enemy. So this is just a small addendum I wanted to mention. The feel, it's usually going to be better if you have this enabled. So back into the animation graph. Now we have the montages set up, but we still need them to play over the idle animation. So what we do is we right click and we look for slot default slot. As you can see, this was the same default name used for the montages. So if you go into slot name, you can actually again select the ones that we set up before. So we want to have 2 slots nodes in here, one for the attack slot and another one for the hurt slot. And then we want to connect them over this connection over here, kind of like this. And the way that this is the way you read what's going on here is, by default, the animation which is gonna play is gonna be your idle pose. But if you're playing a montage which uses the attack slot, then that's gonna override your idle pose and is gonna play that one instead. And the same goes for the hurt animation, which is gonna have the highest priority. That means that if you're doing an attack, but then something triggers your hurt animation, your attack is always gonna stop and hurt animation is always gonna be the one playing. But if you're playing a hurt animation and then you try to attack, the attack is not gonna play because he has a lowest priority. This way, things like hurt can never be overridden by things which are not as important or should not be able to override that. Like if your character is getting damage, it makes no sense for them to be able to start an attack then. And that's how this priority works, and that's why we set 2 different slots instead of just using the default one. So now from the animation graph, let's move into the event graph, which is kind of the same you saw back into the character base. We set up 3 different animation notifiers, so we're gonna be able to just look them up doing right click and looking them up. And as you can see, there are all 3 of them, so we can just add them and it's gonna look something like this. So now when in the montage is gonna reach the frame that we set to call that notify, is gonna call this event here in the event graph, so we can hook up logic based on that. What we want to do is we want to try get pawn owner, and the idea here is The pawn owner is whatever actor, or in this case character, has this animation blueprint playing on one of its skeletal meshes. Or to make it more basic, when you make a character, then you're also going to be able to assign an animation blueprint to that. And if you try get pawn owner, then what you get is the character on which this has been set to play on. So a lot of people will try to make you use this like this, as in you try get pawn owner and then you cast to the thing it's running on, but this is bad practice, so I really don't encourage this. Instead, what you should do, going back where you made your character, you right click blueprints and you create a blueprint interface. We're gonna call it melee fighter, well, BPI melee fighter. And then in there you can set a series of functions or abstract functions. And what these are for, I'm gonna show in a minute, but for now you just call them, in this case I'm using the same names as I called the notifies from before, but you can use what, it doesn't matter if they have different names. The point is you need to understand what they're supposed to do. One is supposed to start the hit damage on the hitbox, another one is gonna stop it, and another one is gonna say, okay, the attack is over, now you can make another attack. So back into the animation, anim BP character, the animation blueprint for the character, you're gonna be looking for them. This is the wrong screenshot. These are supposed to be named respectively attack starts and terminate attack, but yeah, these ones. So you're gonna look for the three interface functions we just made. So starting with attack starts, and then you're gonna hook it up to an animation notify. Again, these ones have the same name, but they don't have to. I'm just using the same name to keep it simple. And you do the same thing for all three of them. So now what's gonna happen is each time the animation montage is gonna call one of these animation notifies, we're gonna take the pawn, or the character in this case, that this animation blueprint is running on, and we're gonna call the interface, the respective interface on that, which for now does not do anything, but this is the right setup to allow to have our character communicate with the animation blueprint. Therefore, we move back to the character. We select the mesh component here, which so far we have not interacted with, and we're gonna first set the skeletal mesh to be the one we've imported earlier, so the one of our character, and we also rotate it and move it down as required. And then we go into animation class, and we set the animation blueprint underscore character that we have been working with so far. Now, this is how all of this looked earlier. Well, I did not mention what this thing does, but it was basically a placeholder way of destroying the hitbox, so we're just gonna pretend that's not there. First, we're gonna disconnect the input to the old code, because we don't need that to work like that anymore. We're gonna move the input somewhere else. We're gonna look for play animation montage. Then we're gonna set this to be our first punch montage we made, and we're gonna connect them. So now when you give input, the montage we set up is gonna play, and the animation notifies that we set are also gonna be fired, which in turn they're gonna be firing the interface calls that we implemented into the animation blueprint. So now we need to be able to receive those calls. So here in the character class, we're gonna go into class settings, and we're gonna add an interface, which is gonna be the melee fighter interface we have just made. Now that we implemented that interface, and after compiling, we're gonna be able to look up the event for starts, attack over, and the one for the wind down ended. So we're gonna do that, and now all of those codes that we were making to the animation blueprint, now we're gonna be able to receive them here, which means that the montage is played, the montage calls the notifiers, the notifiers in the animation blueprint call the interface calls, and the interface calls fire this event into the character class we made. Which means that we can take this code from up here, which was previously being called by the input directly, and we can put it down here after the attack starts. So when the point arrives in the animation where the punch begins, this thing is gonna be fired, which in turn is gonna be calling these two functions, the one which spawns the hitbox and the one which delivers damage to all the actors already overlapping, and also subscribe or binds the hitbox to also deal damage to things which are gonna be overlapping later on before the hitbox is destroyed. And down here in the event attack over, we're gonna drag destroy hitbox from bottom left here, and we're gonna hook it up there. So that means that when we reach the notify where the attack is over, it's gonna be destroying the hitbox for us. But now we have one issue, which is right now you press the melee attack button, and each time you press it, it's always gonna start the attack animation. And we don't want that, we want it to wait until it's done. So what we do, we put a bit of space in there, and we add the do once node, which is gonna have this animation montage only be fired once. But then we go down here, we take the event win down over that we interface call that we made, and we're gonna connect it to reset. So let's go through this again. We give input here. The first time is gonna go through just fine, and then it's gonna close behind it. It's gonna start the animation montage. At some point in the montage is gonna fire a notify, which is gonna result in this one being called. It's gonna spawn an hitbox, and it's gonna start dealing damage. Later in the animation is gonna call this other event, which is gonna destroy the hitbox, and is gonna stop dealing damage. And then at the very end of the animation is gonna call this one, which is gonna re-enable the do once node to go through. So once the animation is over, we're gonna be able to give input again and start a new attack animation. This code here for the new hitbox overlap that we made earlier, this one we still need, so we're gonna move down there. So this is what it looks like right now. When all animation is being set up and all of our code is connected to the animation itself, and yeah, it's driven by the animation itself when it comes to timing and things like that. What if we want to have multiple attack animations, for example, for a combo? That's actually very easy in the way that we set it up. Let's put some space between the do once and the play animation node. Let's look for a multi-gate and hook it up. Basically what this allows us to do is it allows us to have a custom amount of exit pins. In this case I'm just going to go with 0 and 1 because they only have 2 punch animations. And once you connect it, you can basically, with each one of, you're going to cycle through them from the first to the last in increasing order. And you can basically set a play montage, you can connect a play animation montage to each one of them, and you can set each one of these animation montage to have a different montage being played. So first one is going to be punch 01, and second one is going to be punch 02. And if I add more animations, I could also add more pins and more montages. And the important thing, when you're done, make sure that the last montage somehow calls this reset node, because that means that once you play the last animation in the combo, then you're gonna be resetting it, so next one is gonna be the first. So it's gonna be an endless loop, and it's always gonna be in the right order. Now, so far we have been handling dealing damage, but now we also need to touch into receiving damage. So we're gonna create a new graph down here. We're gonna call it damage. We're gonna add the event any damage node, and we're gonna create 2 variables, hit points and the current hit points. The reason we want to have 2 is that generally in games you want one variable to be the one used to tweak the health of a character, and the other one to be the one which internally keeps track of how much health do you have right now. And you always want to have the original amount saved somewhere, so other functions can like compare different values to know your health percent and whatever. So we're gonna set both of them. Then we're gonna create a new function as well. We're gonna call it initialize hit points. And in initialize hit points, you basically set the current hit points to hit points. So you only need to make sure that you have hit points being set to whatever value you want to give to your character. And then current hit points is just gonna be updated accordingly. And we're gonna do that in the begin play node in the main event graph. So back to our damage graph. We want to both set and get the current hit points by dragging them and then picking set and get respectively. And then we want to hook them up like this, so that whenever damage is received, you take your current amount of hit points, you subtract the damage, and then you set that as the new value for the hit points. And if you want to be extra safe, also add a clamp node in there, so it can never go below 0. At this point we add a print string node, we add an append to it, and then we can just connect the current hit points so we can print on screen how much health do you have each time that you take damage. Yeah, and tweaking of course the main hit points value to be something like 50 in this case, and also make sure instant editable and expose on spawn are set to true, so it's gonna be easier to set this main value when you're testing and whatever. Finally, we want an animation to play when you're taking damage. Luckily, we already set up the hurt face animation from before. And this already works, but if you also want to have a different animation for when your character dies, then you can just take the current hit points, compare them to 0, and using the select node, you can basically select either to play the normal damaged animation or a dead animation if you download it and set it up as well. And last but not least, at the end of all this, you want to compare your current hit points against 0 again. And if your health is below 0, you want to set can be damaged to false. And that is because otherwise, since your hitbox is still gonna be there, as in your character hitbox, if you get damaged, if you get punched while you're technically already dead, you're gonna see your character still doing the dead animation over and over. So to prevent that, just disable can be damaged, so once your character is dead, you can no longer receive damage and nothing that would be otherwise be triggered could be triggered anymore. So with all of this done, this is what it's gonna look like. So you can see you do the punch animation, each time is a different one, it cycles between the two different animations. When your opponent is damaged, you see their current health points, and once it's done for, you're gonna see the death animation as well. And that was all for this lecture.